Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So, it's currently rush hour outside if you hear some honking. I just finished Dathan Auerbach's infamous Penpal. I recently did a video on very beloved and well-read horror novels that I haven't ever read, and this was on that list, and it's what inspired me to make that list, and it is the first book on that list that I have now read. And I really wanted to see what all of the hype and chatter was about. I've heard so many mixed things about this book. So I dove in, and I can tell you right now, I was not prepared for the journey that this brought me on. I'm going to read a really quick synopsis on the back. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of my own personal synopsis afterwards because I don't actually love the synopsis on the back of this book, and then we're going to talk about it. The latter half of this video will have what we can call spoilers, but in reality, a lot of it is going to just be me talking about theories of what I think happened. And yeah, so let's dive into this. So it says, in an attempt to make sense of his own mysterious and unsettling childhood memories, a man begins to reconstruct his past. As the games and adventures of his youth become engulfed by a larger story, he finds that it forms a tapestry of unbelievable horror that he never could have expected. Each chapter completes a different piece of the puzzle for both you and the narrator, and by the end of it all, you will wish that you could forget what he never knew. Oh, okay. So, very ominous, doesn't tell you too much about this story, but background on this book is that Dathan Auerbach is a Reddit user. He goes by the name of 1,000 Vultures, and back in, I believe, 2011, he posted a short story called Footsteps on the No Sleep Reddit forum, which is basically his creepypasta. A creepypasta is kind of a fictional short horror story posted on the internet. It's kind of how we got Slender Man. A lot of creepypastas, and Stolen Tongues as well. A lot of creepypastas work to try and give you first-person perspective and make you believe that what is happening is actually happening. Of course, they are, for the most part, fictional, but they are read from the lens of something that happened to a first-person experience. So for the intents and purposes of this, I'm going to call our main character Dathan. He is not named throughout the novel, but that is what we're going to go with since he is the name on the novel, and it is told from a first-person perspective. The original creepypasta that was posted is the second chapter of this book. Technically it's the first chapter, but there is a little prologue at the beginning titled Footsteps. Most of these chapters were published online and then tweaked a little bit later because he wrote them serialized and didn't intend for them to be a full novel upon first writing Penpal, and then tweaked just a little bit so that they flowed a little bit better. So a lot of criticisms from this book do come from some of the inconsistencies that kind of flow over each chapter. I'm going to talk about those inconsistencies and why, from my personal perspective, they don't bother me. This is the story of a little boy who in kindergarten participates in what I think is an absolutely psychotic project where he writes a note and attaches it to a balloon in the hopes that he will find a random pen pal to write him back for his letter writing part of class. So he can work on his penmanship and addressing letters and writing his name and all of that stuff. Here in 2024, I look at that project and I think that that is absolutely crazy. But apparently in the early 90s and late 80s, that was a thing that I think was done pretty often. Very, very weird. To me, that just screams stranger danger. And I believe this novel primarily focuses on a protagonist who's about 10 years older than me, so I kept having to remind myself that this is the late 80s and early 90s. I was born in 93. I think a large chunk of this book probably takes place in the mid 90s, so if not earlier. So yeah, there's definitely some things where I'm this book should never have happened because everything that's happening is very, very dangerous for children to do, but it was a different time. So yes, allegedly that is the thing that we do, and when our main character does receive a note back from this pen pal, strange things begin to happen and surround him and his family and friends, and this pen pal ends up being a significant figure in his life as he starts to enter into adulthood. Alright, so that is the premise. That is the premise. We have a creepy pen pal talking to a child, sort of. And that is what I went into this book thinking this was going to be about. I felt like it was going to have a lot of letters, a lot of strange like deciphering of notes, and a huge mystery around, again, like almost like an epistle style story. That is not the case at all with this book. This book is broken into, I believe, 6 chapters. They're all kind of different stories and snapshots of our main character's life. It is told out of order, and it is told in relationship, again, back to this pen pal. Everything kind of relates back to what happens, except for probably the opening chapter, Footsteps. I found Footsteps to be one of the most unnerving stories in this narrative. I understand why it was so popular, and I understand why it grew to be basically the catalyst for this full-length novel. I found it very, very creepy. And I really loved how Auerbach was so good at ending his chapters on these kind of cliffhanger moments. I don't want to say cliffhangers, but like shocking revelations that introduced a whole new level of fear to the concept, a whole new level of fear to the story after the fact for the reader to sit and think about. And I think that that is how this book ends on a whole. I spent at least an hour and a half after finishing this book reading fan theories on Reddit because I was so overwhelmed with the conclusion of this novel. Again, a lot of people I think will look at certain things as blatant plot holes. I don't. I think one of the things that you have to take into account in reading this novel is that this is the story of somebody who I am presuming is in like their mid-20s, recounting the vague memories they have from childhood, starting at age 5 and working up, and putting in their voice as a 20-year-old to explain the logics of a 5-year-old. A lot of complaints that I've heard about this book is that like kindergartners and first graders don't talk and act the way that our main character does and his best friend Josh does. And I just, again, this isn't Auerbach saying, oh, this is what I actually literally said. This is what a 20-year-old man or a mid-20-something-year-old man is trying to remember and explain what he said. So the dialogue, yes, felt a little bit older than what these kids should have been saying and how they should have been acting. But at the end of the day, I think if I was to try and write what I thought and acted out as 5 or 6 years old, I would definitely add vocabulary and phrases and logistical thinking that I might not actually have been capable of having at the age that I'm trying to recount. So that didn't really, really bother me. Another few of the inconsistencies in this story I think also can kind of be written away as just misremembering, which almost adds to the creepiness and vagueness of the story overall. I noticed, and this was bothering me so much, but our main character is constantly getting the age of his best friend's older sister wrong. At one point she's 3 years older, and then it seems like she's 2 years older, and then it seems like maybe she's not that much older at all. Like, I was trying to figure out how old the relationship, what the difference between Josh and Veronica's ages were, and to me it was something that I was like, oh, this is like a blatant continuity error. But then as I was continuing to read the story and really paying attention to the kind of ages of other characters, I also noticed that it kind of felt like Dathan was misremembering certain ages and certain pieces of this puzzle as well. He seemed very unsure of how old Josh was when they last spoke, when they last interacted, and a lot of the information he has too ends up being secondhand later on. So I felt like the inconsistencies maybe were flagged, but then kind of add to the genuineness of this trying to just be a recollection of a really dark and hazy time for our main character. Overall, I found this book to be incredibly creepy. I don't think scary is the right word for it. I was never scared reading this book, but I was definitely devastated, heartbroken, on the edge of my seat for a lot of it. And I think what really makes this book work is, again, when you finish those chapters that have these crazy revelations that make you think back on everything else completely differently, and you look back at the conclusion and the big reveal at the very end of this novel, it sticks with you. This is a novel that lingers, and I think it's this lingering fear and this lingering concept of how dark this book was and how much it is really rooted in reality, because there is nothing supernatural. Everything that's happening in this book, with a little bit of a stretch of the imagination, you can see truly happening. And there's a lot of vagueness and a lot of character deception. And again, we are seeing a story through the mind of somebody who experienced it as a child and is now coming to terms with what may or may not have happened through, again, an adult lens, but also finally being able to get answers out of his mother to better shed light on things he might not have understood. So that kind of uncertainty and vagueness that is there, I think, just creates this need for the reader to then really go back and dissect what was on the page. And the more I think about this book, the creepier it becomes, the more connections I can make, and it almost becomes this interactive experience with this novel, unlocking different things the way that I think Auerbach absolutely intended it to be. I found this book very, very, very brilliant. Yeah. I think Boxes was my favorite chapter. It was the one that I think upset me the most, apart from the overall conclusion of this novel. It is also, I think, the most action-packed, the most fast-paced, the one that's going to give the most, the one that's going to shed light on some of the biggest reveals of the novel, too, without coming forward and directly saying it. Again, there's a lot of conclusions that are very easily drawn from reading that chapter without them being bluntly spelled out for you, which I thought made it very, very creepy and extremely unsettling. The end of that chapter really, really broke my heart. Trigger warnings. There's a lot of trigger warnings in this book. Nothing that I couldn't handle. There is no blatant animal cruelty described throughout this novel. I will say there is an open-ended fate for a cat, but what happens is not ever described, and it is something that the reader and author themselves have to pull implications for. It's heartbreaking, but again, there's nothing graphic and there is nothing necessarily written down to disrupt or trigger you. It is what is not said that allows you to create your own conclusions and believe you and lead you to think some pretty horrible things, but that kind of can be said overall for almost all of the chapters here, and it doesn't just apply to animals, it does end up applying to younger characters as well. And it is very, very dark, and it is very, very upsetting, and I think that is kind of what made this book overall brilliant. It was what wasn't said on the page that really got my attention and really made me look at this book in a way I wasn't expecting to. This was a 5-star read for me. Again, I was very impressed with this novel. I went into it knowing that there's a lot of people who just think this novel is fine or weren't impressed with it or found it too unbelievable, and I found the way that it was written to just really, really captivate me. Again, really set me on edge, really make me think and take pause after every single chapter to try and understand what was happening and create a lot of my own fan theories and draw my own conclusions, some of which were proven right, some of which were left open-ended, some of which were completely wrong. So I'm going to go into the spoiler section of this novel and now, mainly because I want to talk about some fan theories that I have and what I personally think this book was about. And again, at the end of the day, this is definitely a novel that is about secondhand guilt, survivor's guilt, and the kind of things that are out of the control of a child, and yet horrible things can happen to them anyway. And it's one innocent school project that upends our main character's entire life, and his entire relationship with his friends and his mom. And again, he is simply an innocent party in this entire affair, and yet it is his action that sets all of this in motion, potentially. So let's get deeper into the spoilers here, because my first question, and I think I have my own answer to it, is who is the stalker? I really thought that because Josh and Dathan looked so similar that we were going to find out that Dathan's mom had an affair with Josh's dad and that they secretly were brothers, and that's actually why they had such good chemistry together and were such good friends and why they looked so much alike. I really thought that was going to be the reveal, but it is not. Maybe that is what it is, but the reaction that and relationship that the two of them had together throughout the story towards the end kind of tells me maybe it wasn't, because that was why I thought that Dathan's mom still had the contact info for Josh's family even after they moved away and changed their number, but I don't know if I believe that anymore, because now I'm kind of on the train of, I think the stalker might have been Dathan's biological father, and I think that is what allows me to understand why the mom stopped reporting things to the police. I have this feeling that at some point she realized who the stalker was. It explained, too, why the stalker was able to so easily find Dathan, even though all they knew was his name and the school that he went to. It would explain why the mom so consistently withheld information from other people, including filing more police reports than I believe she should have. She filed one, and I think it's once she learned who the stalker was that she kind of backed off a little bit. I actually think she filed two. She filed a police report the first time when the dollar bill that says for stamps came back to her son's lemonade stand, and then she filed it again when he went missing in the middle of the night. I think this also is the reason why the stalker couldn't bring himself to kill Dathan and instead opted for Josh. I do think he had an unhealthy obsession, but I think there's almost this ego that prevented the stalker from killing his son, and even if it wasn't his son, from killing his actual from killing the person that he idolized. We also understand that when he's impersonating Veronica on the phone and he says that he loves Dathan, Dathan does write, "I love you back," which might have been what he was looking for all along. And kind of once that happened, he no longer felt the need to have such a connection to Dathan after getting the satisfaction of the creepy "I love you" text. And then of course we believe, or at least I believe, that he was the person who came and sat next to Dathan at the theater when Veronica allegedly stood him up. I do also believe that the man who kept coming and getting snow cones from the snow cone stand also was the stalker, which means he was familiar with the neighborhood. Dathan seemed to have probably recognized somebody from the neighborhood, but of course never put it all together. So to me, that makes me believe that that was probably the father. This lens, I read this theory on Reddit, and I don't know if I believe it or not, because the death of Miss Maggie I found to be very, very strange as well. Miss Maggie was a very, very interesting character, and there's two theories that I saw on Reddit. I'm interested to hear your opinions, but we get this whole mystery with why was Miss Maggie murdered. And we know that after the stalker had been following Josh and Dathan while they were making their raft, and they're making their raft in the woods, that Dathan runs to Miss Maggie's and asks if he can go inside for the first time ever, and she says no because her husband is finally home. So we get a couple things from that. I think the easiest conclusion is that he had been either living under the house already, and as we see in the chapter boxes where Dathan and Josh go into the house, Dathan can hear everything that's happening with Josh above him in the house. So potentially we can conclude that maybe the stalker under the house heard how Dathan's mom explains that Tom is never coming back, and that she would believe other people are her family members from similar resemblances, and because Miss Maggie's mind isn't necessarily all there, maybe he got the idea in his head to impersonate Miss Maggie's husband and not live under the house anymore and spy on Josh and spy on Dathan that way. Or perhaps Miss Maggie's son was the stalker, who is also Dathan's father. This one's a little bit more of a stretch, but I do like the idea of Miss Maggie consistently calling Dathan Chris because she looked like one of her sons as a child. That would also explain why when that child grows up, she would confuse him for her husband, because maybe he potentially looked like her husband back in his youth. because she wasn't all there, but she definitely was still a bit there. And so for me, that was just a theory that I saw online that I thought was really, really interesting. I'm not quite sure if it works, but to me it explained that kind of whole storyline as to why Miss Maggie had to be taken care of. And then obviously, because he's the son, he could then inherit the house and stay and watch for a little bit, obviously until Dathan and his mom left, and then he could obviously go and inhabit the house of the person he was stalking, which is so unnerving. And then we get to the Veronica and Josh chapters towards the end. The Josh storyline really broke my heart because I did really love the connection that Josh and Dathan had. I did think that they were just going to grow apart. I didn't see the ending coming at all. But the Veronica storyline kind of took me off guard. That one I thought was a little strange and a little stretched, and I don't necessarily think that chapter needed to be in the novel. It just kind of added more, and it added a way for Auerbach to get the stalker in a closer proximity to Dathan and make the big reveal that Josh is gone. The death of Veronica I found very senseless and sad. And I just also don't know if I necessarily buy that she would kind of just go on this date with this kid who was debatably 1, 2, or maybe 3 years younger than her when she was a senior in high school. And he was a sophomore. Like, as a senior, I probably wouldn't have gone on a date with a freshman or a sophomore. Again, I'm not sure what the age difference is because it's very blurry. So that I found a little strange. And then, of course, her fate is really, really, really tragic. And to me, that was the only chapter that was written, like, pretty much purely for shock value. I found that to be the cheapest, fear-grabbing chapter of the entire story, and it's where some of those plot holes really kind of find their way in, because the phone being stolen implies that somehow the stalker got into that room with nobody seeing and taking the phone. So there were definitely questionable aspects of that. I also wonder what the photos that the stalker was trying to send Dathan from Veronica's phone was, and they were never revealed. So I wonder if they were photos of him or if they were photos of Josh and Veronica, or what message was being sent that way, but obviously we don't get those answers. And then we have the Josh storyline, which was so extreme and so sad and so visually unsettling, and I was not prepared for that. I think I had a theory that Josh had been taken. I think Josh had been toyed with the same way that Dathan had been. They claimed that he had been sleepwalking when he was around 12 and 13, and going out into the woods was the implication, the same way that Dathan had been taken from his bed, that a note had been left when he ran away. Very similar, except it does seem that at the end the stalker did stop toying with Joshua and actually take him, which makes me wonder if Dathan had still lived by those woods, if that would have been what happened to him as well. We have Joshua taken, and I figured that they were going to find him when the dad reveals that his son is in the box that he buried, and that he was going to be still like a 12 or 13-year-old boy. The biggest heart wrench of that story was when you find out that he had only died recently, and it was almost 4 years after his kidnapping. And it's the thoughts that go through your head of what happened to him that makes the story so deeply sad. The fact that he was dressed in what we can presume is Dathan's clothes that the stalker had stolen from him when he was much younger. The fact that his hair had been dyed to look like Dathan. The fact that he had the photo stapled to his shirt. All of it is so unbelievably horrific, and so unbelievably disturbing, without even writing down the horrors that are there. And I think that's what, one, made me hesitate giving this book a 5-star read, because it kind of made me feel the way that I felt after Gone to See the Riverman, where it's really overwhelming and it's really disturbing and it's really tragic. But the way that it was written and the fact that I'm still thinking about this book and that it's stuck with me, it had the effect that Auerbach wanted to have on the reader, and I think that's very, very powerful and should not be overlooked. The whole discovery of the body is so upsetting. And it makes me wonder why that happened, and I think that's the big conclusion at the end of the novel that we get, is Dathan asking his mom, why Joshua? And that was the moment for me that I really think nailed this book. Because it's this, again, it's this concept of survivor's guilt. It's this concept of how did I escape and my best friend who didn't deserve any of this not? How is it his fault when it's not? You know, there's so many questions to be pulled out of that scene. And I think that is the part of the novel that just really, really got to me. And it nailed the message home of what this book was about. And it solidified how absolutely brutal and terrifying and unsettling and disturbing this book is. So yeah, this was a 5-star read for me. I was blown away by the depth this book had. I was blown away by this mystery, and really, 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 really impressed with how it drew so many emotions out of me and created, again, this lingering fear. And that's something that's very, very difficult, I think, to nail in a novel. You read scary scenes, but nothing that kind of sits with you for days the way that the conclusion of this book did. And I really, really enjoyed it for that. So I'm really happy to have read it. I didn't expect this to be a 5-star read going into it, knowing the premise. I really thought it was going to be like a 3 or 4 and something that I was just like happy that I read at the end of the day. But I am thrilled with this novel. I would love to read more from Auerbach. And I think if you haven't read this novel, definitely pick it up, because it is a whirlwind journey of emotions. And I enjoy, I don't think is the right word, but it was such an experience to read this novel, and it deserves its rankings in like the Creepypasta Hall of Fame up there with Slender Man. So yeah, very, very glad that I was finally convinced to pick this one up, and I was just truly, truly blown away and impressed. So yeah, 5 stars. Would love to hear everybody's fan theories down in the comments below if you guys feel the need to. I would love to read and learn more. I know that some of my theories are probably wrong, or that there's something that proves that I'm completely out of left field. But that's what's so fun about dissecting books, especially ones that are so open-ended and vague in certain categories, and then still very, very, and still giving you so many answers towards the end of the book, as to not make the reader feel cheated for having read so much and not getting all the answers. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I try to post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. And if you enjoyed these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you on the next one. Mwah.